Today, I have the pleasure of moderating the panel on Gigafactories in Europe. And this is a highly relevant topic, as you all know, because it is at the core of industrial competitiveness for the European Union, and it is also one of the key challenges for the competitiveness of one of our main industries, the automotive industry. So we have 4 senior executives here on the panel, and with senior, I do not necessarily mean the age, but much more, of course, their depth of experience. I'm very pleased to have you here, and I would like to start with a round of introductions. To my far right is Marian Bocek. He's the CEO and co-founder of InoBat. To my close right, we have Nemanja Mikać. He's the CEO of L11S. To my left, Dr. Gilles Normand. He's the president of ProLogium Europe and also the executive vice president for global development at the company. And to my far left, we have Nicolas Steinbacher, who's the program lead of Northvolt here in Germany and also the senior director for strategy and corporate development. So thank you all for joining on this panel. And to you in the audience, as usual at our events, we would like to have this as interactive as possible. So you will be invited to ask questions. Please feel free to use the app, and we will also have a little polling to get the discussion started and to see what your views on the subject are. So I would like to start out with a round of very brief introductory statements by our experts, and after that we will jump into the polling and, of course, the Q&A. So Nicolas, if you could start with your brief introduction, please.
Sure. You already said a lot, so I keep it very short. So I'm Nicolas. I'm with Northvolt 3.5 years now. Worked further in Porsche Consulting before with battery strategy in Volkswagen AG as well. And now I'm responsible for our Northvolt Germany program called Northvolt Drive, but also the strategy for the German market. Also, I've been in the site selection process from the very beginning, so I also learned something in the last minutes. Yeah, that's for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicolas. Gilles, you're next.
Yeah, hello everybody. I am Gilles Normand. I've been working for about 35 years in Renault-Nissan Alliance. And from March 2022, I joined ProLogium. ProLogium is a company from Taiwan developing next-generation batteries. We call it lithium ceramic batteries with a solid electrolyte. We have just decided after a long process, was 14 months, a little bit bigger than the 13 months, but a Gigafactory project in northern France in Dunkirk for 48 gigawatt hour to be built there by 2027.
Thank you very much, Gilles. Now I'll hand it over to you. Nemanja, please.
Nemanja, 10 years in the packaging industry, funny enough. Then the last 4 years founded and basically leading 11Es, which is currently the only LFP prismatic cell producing factory in Europe, with plans to basically expand to 8 and then later 40 gigawatt hours in Europe and possibly USA.
Great. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Marian, please.
My name is Marian Bocek. Thanks IPM for being here. It's great to see a lot of fresh faces and full house after last night, so looking forward to discussion. I'm the co-founder and CEO of InoBat. I've been previously investing in a number of IP companies in the battery value chain and set up InoBat 4 years ago as a way to aggregate some of the good IPs that we see on both sides of the Atlantic and integrated with industrial players. So InoBat has just built its first pilot line in Slovakia for NMC ultra-high performance batteries and has recently launched a joint venture with an Asian conglomerate, Goshen, called Gilles, which is now developing a 20 gigawatt hour factory in Slovakia as well. So I hope you can come and check it out.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for your brief rounds of introductory statements. And now I'd like to go over to the poll. It's already running, and I'm seeing a lot of participation. The question, of course, is by 2028, multiple gigafactories will be up and running in Europe. So this is interesting because it kind of tests the waters of your optimism here in the audience amongst all the experts. And there is a lot of optimism in the room, obviously. Even with a precise year date of 2028, about 2/3 of the audience here believes, yes, we will have multiple gigafactories up and running in Europe. However, about 1/4 of you are undecided if that's really going to happen, and there's even about almost 10% that think it's not going to occur. Well, that's some food for thought. I think with the optimism in your back here on the expert panel, that puts you under quite some pressure to actually deliver, right? And so I would like to start with a question that I'd like to pose to Nicolas first. What do you think does it actually need to establish a successful gigafactory, and what are some of the big challenges that you see?
Sure. I think it all starts with a very good philosophy, strategy, and the right storyline and narrative. Of course, you have all these factors in site selection and gigafactory programs, which is water, energy, and of course workforce and everything what we have just seen from Bob. But it's also for us at Northvolt always very important that we have that nucleus, which is sustainability, because we should always remember why are we building batteries. It's not because we are putting them into cars because it's so nice. We are doing this because we want to decarbonize. And that is the reason why we have batteries and enable the future of energy and mobility. So I think it is very important to come with a very strong mission and a certain purpose, because that builds the foundation of everything else what you do in terms of site selection. If you want to attract talent, all the young people today which are into batteries but also want to change something more. I mean, when I do interviews, this is the most important thing. Do you have the right narratives? Do you have the right idea what you want to do? Go beyond what is actually the hard facts. The soft facts are the new hard facts in this world. And I think this is very important when you start with that. Then, of course, there is other factors like putting the renewable energy in the focus of the Gigafactory. That's also why we choose Haidt in Schleswig-Holstein as the site location, because we have an excessive wind energy over there. It's more energy than you can actually use. And it's even more sustainable to use the energy where it is than just send it around across the country, to build all the transmission lines and so on. So it's also like next factors besides the regular points which you should have in mind. And this is, for me, something what has something to do with a strategy which is really like long-term.
Well, Nicolas, okay, so you gave us a very nice overview of the generic factors of success for a gigafactory and what the challenges might be. Gilles, could you now perhaps focus on a case, and the case that you mentioned in your introductory statement, the site decision for Dunkirk? What were the factors driving that decision?
Yeah. As I said, March 2022, I joined ProLogium. I was in charge of working with the team to develop the international strategy. And obviously, what was very clear now that the era from importing batteries from Asia was really fading away. So we had to produce nearby the markets. So then we studied which were the key electric vehicle market. You know, you had China, you have Europe, and you have US. And at the end, with a very long process, as I mentioned, we decided to go for Dunkirk. I would say maybe fundamentally for 4 reasons. The first reason is we were looking for decarbonized and cost-competitive electricity. This is number 1 of our variable cost, but if you look now at the RFQ from car makers, in my past experience, before it was what is a technical feature, what is a cost. Now the number 1 line is what is your CO2 per kilowatt hour. This is a number 1 requirement, and this is in order to promote what the young generation are expecting. So we need to produce the batteries, because the battery is still considered as a very high CO2 generation by the people who are not so in favor of electric vehicles. So it was very important that we reduce the CO2 generation in manufacturing the battery. So cost competitive and decarbonized electricity was the number 1 level. And the number 2 level was a developing ecosystem around the battery. We would be the 4th Gigafactory in Northern France region, means we would develop together with the other 3 Gigafactory education program for university, for school. In Dunkirk, you have the value chain actors coming in place, like a CAM and pre-CAM company that has decided to go for Dunkirk. Battery recycling company has decided as well to go to Dunkirk. So it's a little bit of a snowballing element. The third element, which was as well quite important for us, I would say is small but not so small, is to have a site available in the industrial zoning. This is important because we could see that more and more resistance for the people to put new greenfield factory. So if you want to put those greenfield factory, you must be in an industrial zoning. And the last point, which was quite important, is to be proximity with our key customer. We are honored to count Mercedes-Benz as a shareholder of our company. So we were looking for a location, Deep Sea Harbor, very well connected with Interland. It's by freeway or by train line to reduce CO2. It's just 350, 400 kilometers from Germany. On all the electric vehicle manufacturing or assembly plant today are a little bit more in Northern Europe. So the location was as well quite important.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that concrete experience with one example. I'd like to turn over to my right-hand side. And Nemanja, how did you decide to enter the battery cell industry? And what made you decide to select the prismatic LFP back in 2020 when you started this?
Yeah. Okay, just to kind of, I have to go back to this poll, sorry, but
Sure.
it says multiple. Multiple is 2. So technically everybody could agree that the Gigafactories will come online. But if we rephrase it and say, will 80% of the announced capacity be actually realized capacity, I don't think we're going to see 85%. So that will be maybe more interesting to know how much do you actually believe in all of these stories and all of these gigafactories coming online. Of course, we here do believe strongly, but it's just nice to know for the audience, because all of you, supply chain equipment, everybody's kind of depending on it, and they need a semi-reliable answer on that. But anyway, yeah, I come from the packaging industry, so been making a lot of stuff you eat every day or drink, some Nespresso capsule or some yogurt lid or some food for your pets. And funny enough, 4 years ago, we've switched to battery business because it was actually similar. And nobody knew that. I said it maybe on a couple of conferences, but it comes quite a surprise how your mindset can basically shift to a completely different industry, but use a kind of a similar technological concept. And that's one thing. And the second thing, imagine me trying to promote LFP in early 2020 when COVID started. And then it was like, it was actually a combination of LFP and cell-to-pack, which is basically a very big battery cell integrated into a vehicle or an energy storage system. And it was like, it was obvious then, but it was like, this is coming. We have to have, after all the, let's say, more expensive vehicles, we have to have also affordable ones. And then it was a really big uphill battle to actually explain that LFP will have a huge chance due to its benefits later on. So now it's obvious. Luckily, we have 3.5 years of work on it. But back in the day, it was quite a challenge. So some things you have to predict, but ultimately, it's just super hard work. Like you work every day as much as you can, and you have to work smartly and hardly to get it executed. Because idea and vision is like 1%. And then the rest, you just have to step on the gas and do it.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that applies to so many different industries, and it's an interesting metamorphosis from coming from packaging and going into batteries. So, thank you for contributing that aspect. Marian, all the optimism here in the audience. What's your take on it from the perspective of your company?
I agree with Nemanja that actually, vision without execution, it's hallucination, right? So you have a lot of big announcements, and building a gigafactory is not easy. We've all been inspired by Northvolt because you guys were first movers, so thank you for that. And obviously, it wasn't an easy act to follow. And I think actually what we have to realize is that the strategy where you announce a gigafactory and you hope that, the bigger, the better, you have the government support without necessarily having a product and customer, and you hope that once you build it, the customers will come. It's a flawed model, right? And this is why maybe British Volt is not with us anymore. And I think the way Northvolt has done it, it's something that InoBat has taken those lessons. The Vestaras model, start small, learn how to build it, go from grams to kilograms of active materials, and then de-risk it, and then go into the gigafactory level. So I think the players who are doing it kind of bottom up rather than top down, having the customer specification at the beginning of the development, mapping of the location, the sizing of the gigafactory, those guys will succeed, and the rest will fall away. You're going to see a major consolidation of the industry. It's already happening. A lot of people are falling away. It's a very Darwinistic industry, and I think only a handful will make it by the time we get to 2030. So hopefully we'll be, few of them, and we'll deliver a handful of gigafactories. But I don't expect it's going to be at the pace of CATL or China, which has delivered few dozens of gigafactories each within a 12-month time frame. So we have lots to learn, and we got to work together to get at least few successful gigafactory projects off the road.
Thank you very much, Marian. I think what you said is so true, that at every type of emerging industry, we see that shakeout that you just mentioned in the early stages of maturation, and we'll have to see what the dominant designs are going to be. And that's what we're about to discuss further. Nicolas, there's audience is very kind. They have directed 2 questions right to you, and maybe we can combine them if you like. The first one, obviously, is what are the lessons learned from the first installations in Sweden for the new project in Germany? And also, why did Northvolt decide not to start in Germany with the Gigafactory and move to the US?
Yeah, I start with the first one. So generally, I think there is a lot to learn, right? I mean, it's like this, that we started the planning of a Gigafactory like years ago. And then by that time, there was actually no grown-up knowledge how you build a Gigafactory in Europe. So I think we were by that time quite bold and tried to do the best to design the factory. So obviously you also make some mistakes, right? But this is also now very valuable to understand, okay, what do we carry over? And one thing is actually, and this is something what is also more an ecosystem topic, right? I mean, we know we're in Gilles because we believe that green energies need to be produced with green energy, but it also comes with challenges, right? You need to build the whole ecosystem. You need to build the city. You need to build houses. You need to build the infrastructure and everything. These gigafactories have their own gravity field in terms of what you need to build up. And I think the city and community is very supportive in all of this. They make this their factory, what we also do with Heide. We talked about collaboration this morning. It's super important, the stakeholder management. But for Heide and Schleswig-Holstein, we are now even being more early to build things up in terms of the training center in Itzehoe, what we're doing with partners in order to set the training infrastructure right, but also the housing programs, right? So it's an economic program, these gigafactories, which are far bigger than the gigafactories itself. And then when it comes maybe a little more to production, I think what we always try to plan for is, of course, like a steady state situation, that you make it like the most efficient way. Also, when coming to the perfection, but what is clear is that you need like a quite long time to ramp up these factories and make sure that all the parameters are setting together. It's much more parameters in battery cell production than in automotive production, for instance. So you need to also have flexibility and combine flexibility in the planning with standardization to reach for efficiency. And to level that out and balance it out, I think this is something what we already put into the planning of the factory, which is ongoing right now. And I connect that with a second question. So we are still doing Germany. We're not moving into the US. We announced that we want to have a Canada Gigafactory in Montreal. So that is maybe what is meant here. But we are progressing with our plans on Heide. And for sure, we are quite far with that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for tying together both of these questions. And I'd like to use one of the questions that has been ranked very highly, and I'd like to address it to you, Gilles. There are already gigafactories running in Europe today, obviously. They are run only by Asian companies and not by European ones. Can the European gigafactories really be competitive? If yes, why and when? That's a loaded question. A lot of sub-questions there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I guess we have to remind us all how the game started. The game started, if you were like a football game, this was, we were just in the second half of the first half of the game. So we are, at the beginning of the game, Asia scored a number of goals. On US, on Europe was nowhere, completely flattened out. But this is just the first half of the game. So in the second half, in US, in Europe, started to try to level the field with companies like Northvolt to say, okay, let's build some cell production capabilities there. The people say, yeah, but there is no ecosystem. You don't have the raw material. You don't have the upstream. You don't have the downstream. But if you don't have a gigafactory, there is no way for you to put everything in line. So this is, I would say, the second half of the first part of the game where we are more or less today leveling the play. We're still very far away from winning the game. In the second part of the game, what we need is to develop a new technology, and we do intend with our company to introduce a next generation battery, and to think over about how we can catch back in the process, because solid state batteries will be a progressive adoptions. It's not going to be overnight. The market is going to be LFP from one side and solid state battery from the other side. You will have a big chunk of the market for LFP, for cost competitiveness, and you will have NMC, and NMC will go for a little bit more demanding, more intensive usage, and it's going to be split between liquid electrolyte and solid electrolyte. So it means that, I guess, because of this fundamental requirement to reduce CO2 in the production of the batteries, because there is an ecosystem being put in place, there is a good room for the gigafactory in Europe to develop and to, how can I say, to be profitable. Because at the end of the game, still the battery is 40% of the car value. Battery is 40% of the car value. So all the car makers are engaged into making sure that this is localized nearby the production site. Now, if we were only to look at the current technology, I guess we would miss the opportunity to go to the next stage. But it's fair to say that even though the current technology is a great one, still there is some element that needs to be improved. For instance, in terms of safety, fundamental safety, so that we can enable aeronautics application, which today is not possible. Reducing weight, what we call gravimetric density, needs to be reduced, again, for aeronautics application. We need to go for, hopefully, more volumetric density to increase the number of watt-hour in a reduced space, and eventually to reduce the cost of the battery, the cost of the pack, because customers are considering the electric vehicle are too expensive. So all these elements put step by step will enable cost competitiveness, CO2 competitiveness, and I guess this is why in Europe we have a good chance to be competitive. Right. And in ProLogium, our project is not just another gigafactory. We are just going to open our first gigafactory. It will be the world premiere for solid-state batteries early next year in Taiwan, but it will be capped to 1 to 2 gigawatt-hour. Our most important project is in Europe, 48 gigawatt-hour, with the R&D center, with a deep localization of all our components. Excellent. So I guess the era from Asian makers just to do on importing components from Asia again is over.
All right, so wonderful. I like the soccer analogy because it means that there's still some room for catch-up in the second inning. Exactly. Wonderful.
Thank you. The game is not lost.
Thank you, Gilles. So we're getting more precise now with the questions, and Nemanja, this one obviously is addressed to you, and it applies to the issue of sourcing. What are the sourcing plans for the cathode LFP material And do you have plans to make the cathode yourself?
I just have to relate to the previous question, just
Of
a couple of sentences, because I think it's the crucial one to this panel. And how can we be competitive and why? And let's continue with the football. So we're now 65 minutes in. It's still 3-0 or whatever they're leading. So we have to be better to catch up and actually win. So I don't see that currently the case because Asian speed is still higher than European. So I'm not seeing a leveling field yet. But let's just say, what does competitive mean? Is it just cost? Like, is it just, are we talking about that? Probably not. Then we have the relationship with our customer, which can be a specific application where half might fail, but solid state might succeed because it has a niche market. It's possible to happen. But quality, what is quality, gradations of quality and all that? What is the risk? Do companies believe that the perceived level of risk is smaller than the actual level of risk, vice versa? So all of these factors, when you factor them in, are we really competitive? I think not yet, but we have come a long way. That's definitely true, but from zero, it's not really difficult to come a long way. Now, when we are supposed to start big operations, now when the big game starts. So we were now in the local city league, now we're in the Champions League. And in the Champions League, there are no excuses. So basically, a few tips on how to do it from at least our perspective. I mean, definitely, we have to, they say time is money. You can buy certain time with money, but some things you just have to experience or collect people who have experience to kind of go through that process and then have these incremental improvements and actually believe in your own execution. And there you basically, apart from trying to be as competitive as possible, you also have to find a way how to service your product market fit in order to be more successful. And on the second one, I think this person is following me on the conferences because I have this question every time. But it's so high. Essentially, yes, it's LFP is on its beginnings, early beginnings. It's infancy stages in Europe. And at the moment, we are sourcing most of our LFP material from Asia. And we do have plans with multiple sources to localize that in Europe. We also have plans to, I wouldn't say produce ourselves, but through certain partnerships or possibly doing it ourselves partially, we do have plans to localize LFP production in Europe.
All right. Well, if you're in the Champions League, you always have a fan base, and they follow you around.
Indeed.
All right. So I like this discussion very much because we're getting at the core of the competitiveness issue of the gigafactories here in Europe. And Marian, what's your take on this? I mean, we've got basically two teams. It seems like the European team and the Asian team. And we're in the midst of a tournament, a very tough tournament. Asia's in the lead. Europe might be catching up. By the way, for a proper soccer game, there's also a referee, and there's the spectators. Where do they come in? What's your view on that? If we stay with that metaphor.
Yeah, maybe I loved tennis more than soccer, so I would actually use the Federer-Djokovic analogy, right? I mean, Chinese are Roger Federer. Started a long time ago, they are 10 years ahead of us, and just like Federer, he inspired the next generation, right? He's the first guy who thought of what to eat, physical training, mental toughness, and then a Serbian superstar shows up, right? Djokovic, completely inspired by what Federer did and took it to another level. Can Europe have many Djokovic? Not for the time being, I have to be honest, but can we have many Jakub Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, Alexander Zverev, top 10 players? I think you see them here, right? And I think after us, there's going to be a next gen that will be Djokovic because the gap is just so big between the Chinese and us. 30 years ago, China was 10 years behind Europe. 30 years later, they're 10 years ahead of us. So once we bridge the gap, I think we'll have Djokovic after 2030, and a few of us need to get to the top 10, and that's how I rate the gigafactories. How many I see in Europe top 10 by 2030. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank
you very much.
Of
course.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I get fundamentally one thing we have to factor in, and I saw it in the automotive industry, is impact of the COVID, which disrupted completely the supply chain. on the impact of a little bit of a geopolitical situation, on the impact of the CO2 requirement for young generations. And this ends up, from what I could see, from an area where globalization is over and we go back to super regionalizations. So I mean, Europe for Europe, US for US, and we could see in the previous presentation how you saw how there was a race for Gigafactory, on how they were catching up between US and Europe. So I guess if we were still in the pre-COVID world, if we were in the pre-geopolitical context world, I'm sure that you're right, it will be hard to catch back. But it's fair to say that now there is a huge amount of money, public money, either from the US or from Europe, to level a little bit the field. Is it fair or not? It's another discussion. But it's an element which level a little bit the field. And secondly, you have a potential new protectionism rules, which completely out of WTO rules, because this would be based on CO2. And there is a number of regulations that is about to be taken on this regard. So this is why I guess maybe the game is no longer as, how can I say, open as it used to be in the past. And this is why I guess maybe in the future, even though you're right on the principle, sure, Asia will retain significant cost competitiveness. But as you rightfully mentioned, maybe the competitiveness will no longer be measured by cost, but by CO2 or other elements.
Well, there's many drivers. Thank you for reiterating on that. Nicolas, we've been talking also about the importance of the supply chains for setting up a gigafactory anywhere, also in Europe, of course. That ties into what Hans is asking. What do you see when it comes to the relationship with the suppliers? Are they going to co-locate with you? And how important are these supply chain issues for setting up the Gigafactory?
Before I answer that question, I also want to relate to that one, because I think, yes, Asia is in the lead. It's also no surprise because they started quite early. There was heavy subsidized situation in China as well. And they learned from the consumer electronics industry, where all the batteries were kind of integrated. Yeah. I think we often underestimate the potential Europe has. Like, we have fantastic engineers, which are working in the best industries already. I think sometimes it's about, and I started with that, like the philosophy that we do not use short tracks or shortcuts in regulation, and that we are bold enough to go forward, being optimistic about things. I often say, I mean, we for quite some time try to optimize the combustion engine for another 0.1% in terms of efficiency. And I think we just need to learn more about how to be entrepreneurial, quick and fast again. And also the leveling playing field needs to be that you have the regulation which is allowing for that. And it's not only subsidies or something. This is not right to say that subsidies they help, yes, but it's more like the processes and how you're able to bring these gigafactories on the ground and how you aggregate all the enablers you have. I think the enablers are all there, but it needs to be packaged up in the correct way. So that's on that question. And the other topic on the gigafactories and the supply chain, I think I talked about this gravity. So of course it makes a lot of sense to locate suppliers close to the factories. We are already looking for this in terms of our German program, and having together with the Schleswig-Holstein government, like located already some of these spots where we can place these factories, or like the supplier factories. I think what is very important in Germany, if I'm looking at that, is that we are also making the processes of building easier. I think this is something what we have also been engaged with the Deutschland Pact, to say, okay, how can we make processes even faster if we want to start to build? Then there's people missing in the authorities which are running these processes. So it's not only that we want to build gigafactories; it's about the whole ecosystem that you are able to do this. And for sure, you talked about the topic of harbors and rail modal yards. So this is also very important to have close by, in order if you have like overseas supply chains, and this for quite some time. So absolutely necessary to have it close by.
Nicolas, do you think that regulation is one of the contributing factors for the time lags, that it's taking us longer. That ties into this question here. The first Gigafactory announcement in 2016 is still not online, so it appears that the audience believes there's too much of a time lag. Is regulation behind this? Is that keeping us slow, or what are the factors that is, why is it taking longer here in the EU for building up Gigafactories?
Sure, one part is regulation, but the other thing is then for sure bringing everything together. I mean, on the question, it is up and running, right? So it is for sure producing battery cells every day right now. So, and for a player who is not a Chinese or Asian player generally, you need to do all the things the first time in Europe, right? And if you're scaling a gigafactory and just putting the concept to Hungary, also bring in your own workforce, to which you have in your own factories in China, and of course it's kind of an advantage you have, because here you need to train everybody, right? And nobody in Europe did that before. So there is also a kind of natural gap which you need to fill. But I think it's by the time you can do this, yeah. But you need some more starting help, I guess.
All right, all right.
May I?
Sure.
No, I guess from regulation, it's fair to say that in Europe we have more regulation than in Asia or in the US, but we have as well a regulation stability, and it helps a lot when you have a project. For instance, there is a 2035 IC ban in Europe, and this is a good visibility. And most car makers already said that by 2030-31, whole their lineup is going to be full electric. They are even going to be. In front of that, you have in the US, you have IRA providentials, but this is left at the end to the administrations. Already, if I heard well or read well, Donald Trump said that if he were re-elected, the first decision will be to scrap IRA providentials. So we know, and this is terrible for car makers, because they don't know how to stand on the number of projects that have been put on hold in the US because of this type of uncertainty. So it's true that regulation is seen as cumbersome, is definitely more important in Europe, but this is the rule of the game and we have to play with those rules.
Marian, when it comes to impediments to establishing the gigafactories, like the ones we just discussed, what's your view on this?
I think it's fear, right? Europeans are so afraid of failing, you know, and we just wait till things are perfect and we tick all the boxes rather than just making progress. You know, that's why Tesla is building gigafactories in, you know, less than 12 months, Chinese, because there's that belief that this is what the country needs, what the region needs, this is what the shareholders need, and what climate needs. I mean, if we want to avert the crisis or mitigate it, to slow the death of our planets, we gotta act fast, right? And that imperative is missing in Europe. You know, somehow we feel like we have time, but we don't. So it's really, it's all these mitigants that the regulators, governments put in place just to avoid losses rather than accelerate winning strategy.
Thank you. Nemanja, closing remark on our panel?
Closing remarks, yeah. To close with the sports times, the tennis is time independent. Football is time dependent.
True.
That's the only bad thing about tennis. I mean, when it comes to Gigafactories.
Drag it on.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll have a lot of Djokovic in this world, because you have to have a lot of stars aligned for that. So it has to be a lot of persistence, hard work. It has to be a lot of determination and taking some risk as well, because we've seen in the US how that works. So I think we can also take some risk and then basically do the next steps, do the hard work, and execute on the well-known strategy.
Excellent, and very motivating closing remarks. Thank you. Our time is up, dear audience. It's been fun interacting with you. Thank you for all the questions and the polling. And of course, thank you to our experts. Big round of applause.